This is some tips, tricks, and kind of background and insight into what UX is, what UX isn't, and how that applies to games. UX in games is a relatively still nascent discipline. A lot of times, a lot of games are coming out, and people will look at it and say like, "Oh, who did the UX design?" And they're like, "Nope, nobody. We just sort of copied what other games did, and that's kind of how we did it." And that's all well and good, and a lot of really great games happen that way. But I find if you put a lot more rigor and thought and intentionality into how you approach your game's overall experience, you can make things really shine. So we'll cover what UX is and isn't, what UX means in games, some core principles, my favorite UX laws, and some quick power tools. Just a lot of people like know some of this stuff instinctually, but they don't know it academically. And so that's what I'm hoping I kind of cover here. So first off, what is UX? UX stands for user experience. Sometimes it's now recently being called XD, experience design. It depends on the company. Adobe really likes XD and Apple apparently likes XD. So some of the tech world is moving towards that abbreviation. So yeah. And then, so basically I like to think of it as how a player feels when they're using a feature or a system in your game, right? That's the user experience. So it answers questions like, how do I find that thing? Is it worth my attention, my time, or my money? Is it too complicated or too simple? Should it interrupt my flow state if I'm in the middle of playing the game? These are all decisions you want to make around user experience. Traditionally, UX is highly conflated with UI in the games industry. A lot of times in the game studios, they will just call you a UI designer or a UI engineer, even though you're largely working on things that are more of the user experience nature. User interface is how does the feature or system look when presented to a player? Is it an icon or do you render the item? What font and color should it be? What kind of texture should it be? Things like, is this readable if my eyesight sucks or I'm colorblind? Things like that, right? Those are more around the bespoke parts of designing an interface. Here's a big bunch of different things that you could study that all sort of overlap with each other. Generally, I like to think of this kind of brown circle as the general coverage of user experience. This is what I would call an interaction designer. If you're coming from mobile apps or web app development or tech development, you've probably worked with an interaction designer. And then, in a game studio, I think UX design is kind of where this circle is, right? So answering questions like, how many screens is this going to be? Does it need a confirmation prompt? Where in the menus do I stick this new feature? And in 3 years, when we have 500 skins, will they all fit, right? Things like that. Like these are the kind of things that a UX designer tries to handle. Different from a UI artist, which is what does it look like? How shiny is the button? Does it look clickable enough? Does it look lickable? Does it look season 8 enough? If season 8 is a cyberpunk theme, right? These are all UI things. And then in this case, does it look apexy enough, right? Does it feel on brand? I have some blue slides in here that are just some quotes that I like. UI is the saddle, the stirrups, and the reins. UX is the feeling you get being able to ride the horse, right? So that's a nice way to think about the dichotomy of those two disciplines here. So what is UX in video games? This is a diagram that's just from the academic concepts of UX in the layers of user experience design. And we're going from the most abstract to the most concrete, or in the beginnings of making a piece of software from the conception to completion, right? And so in a game, this translates to, our strategy layer is what's fun about this game? What's the core loop of playing it? We start getting into the scope, which is like, do we have cosmetics? Do we have a social system? Do we have a commerce aspect to our game? How does the lobby work? How do I invite friends into it? We start to get into the structure of the game. Is there a top nav? Is there a pop open menu? Does it use light bars? Does it use free cursor versus hotbox, right? For different types of interactions. And then we get towards like the skeleton of a game. And this is what people largely think about when they say like they redesigned a game, like a new Fortnite redesign came out. It's generally just shuffling around a lot of stuff on this layer, right? So layout, button placement, how many message of the days do they hit you with when you first sign in? And then the very, very top level is your visual design, your fonts, your colors, your highlights, the actual tactile pixel craft of making a piece of software on a screen. I like to think of two broad angles of attack for handling working on UX in games. The first one is the psychology angle, which is how do you increase a player's motivation to do a thing, right? And then the second one is the usability. How do I decrease the friction around that player doing a thing, right? And so sometimes you'll play a game and you're like, I'm so sick of all of these fucking menus. That's just friction that to improve the user experience, you could consolidate those things, put them on a delay, make a never show me again button. All those kinds of things are focused on the usability of it. But the psychology is increasing a player's motivation. How do you show them a timer that says this event is only available for the next 24 hours? And you set that little hook in their head of, if I want to try that event, I really need to do it soon, right? That's working towards motivation. If you find any element of your interface requires instructions, then you need to redesign it. I'll get to this a little bit more. People don't read the text you put in your game. They react to the gestural feel of the button or the flow of the thing, right? Anytime you show someone, I'll say more than 2 sentences, there is 0% chance that they're actually going to read it. And so just remember that, because a lot of times you'll design a thing and you'll say, oh, people are getting stuck on this thing. And your first instinct is to add a little text blurb explaining why they should do this thing. That's invisible. No one's going to read it, right? So make the button bigger, shinier, put fucking fire or magic on it. Like do a thing that makes a person want to touch it, and then you'll increase their motivation. So some of my core UX principles that I've applied to the games that I've worked on. First, very similar to what we were just talking about, don't make me think, right? This comes from a old web usability book called Don't Make Me Think. And it's really just about if somebody is pretty drunk or very high or just super tired, what's the thing that they look at and click on like while their eyes are half closed, right? So like design for your most stoned player, and then you'll have a lot of people that are happy. And that's kind of what this book is about. It's still worth a read, even if it's not about games. Back to players don't read your UI text. You could probably have typos in there and no one would notice for a long time. Another principle here, consistency is key, but predictable is a good fallback, right? So if you're making a lot of different systems that all work similarly, the first time you train a player to use a system, try to reuse that same metaphor or verb or set of actions for all the other systems, because they'll start to be trained on that. And so just staying consistent to yourself, like don't make your quest management system feel completely fucking different than your inventory management system. Use the same constructions around it. One, it's less fucking code for you to write in the first place, but two, you've trained them to do one, now they automatically know how to do the other, right? But if you can't make it consistent, at least make it feel predictable, right? Simplify through thoughtful reduction. So this is, I always like to do a simplify pass on every game that I work on, where I'll make a thing and it's fairly complex and I'm like, what can I cut out of this? And it still works just as well, right? Always look for little things you can nip and get rid of, right? Because every little thing you can trim just makes your game feel more polished, more tight, more respectful of the player's time. And that all comes from this book, The Laws of Simplicity by John Maeda. Highly recommend that if you're into design. Make it look intentional. This is the one thing that I tell all my artists and my designers is they're like, well, how should I make it look? And I'm like, make it look like we meant it to look like that. That's like the easiest answer for, it's just like, okay, look at the game. Now put your button in it. Does it look like the people making this game meant to put that button there? As long as they did, then it's going to feel fine. Another little quote, design used to be the seasoning that you'd sprinkle on for taste. Now it's the flour you need at the start of the recipe. This is true for literally all aspects of consumer-facing software development, right? Not so much for an API or a platform, but if you're going to have normal everyday users from all different skill levels and tech affinities, you really need to bake design into the thing that you're doing. We have 10 minutes. I'm going to speed through this then. My favorite UX laws. You can go read about these. They all have their own Wikipedia pages. Doherty threshold. In general, if a thing in a piece of software takes longer than 2 seconds, people feel like it's busted. So make it happen fast or do something like a spinner, right? Fitz's law. The time it takes for someone to like move a cursor or a mouse onto a thing is the ratio of the size and the distance, right? So one of the reasons that all modern operating systems put a whole dock of icons against the bottom edge of the screen is because having it against the bottom edge of the screen means it's technically an infinite size. You can slam your mouse against the bottom of the screen and you can get it. If that bar was floating in the middle of the screen, the time to target would actually go up because they have to get the cursor right inside the right part of the box. They can't use the edge of the screen as a barrier. So Fitz's law, tons of stuff there. This is why, especially on mobile design, you're like, why is that button literally half of the screen? Well, because they want you to click it faster than anything else. Jacob's law, this is an approach to all kinds of design. Most players also play other games besides your game. So they expect your game that looks sort of like that to work in a similar way, right? So if you're going to make an FPS, just start with all the normal FPS controls, right? Like put reload on the typical reload button because it's just going to aggravate everybody because they come with a vocabulary from a previous set of experiences. Hicks's law, the number of time it takes to make a decision increases with the number of choices you're given them. So I like to say one of the sweetest examples of this is in general on Apple's e-commerce website, even though they sell hundreds of variations of different things, they always show you three: a cheap one, an expensive one, and a medium one. And that three really funnels people down into making a decision early, right? So present them with less choices and the speed of their decision will go up. Miller's law, this is just about working memory. People can really only keep 5 to 9 things in their working memory. It's why telephone numbers are generally 7 digits long plus an area code. Just don't make your player try to remember too many things at once. Peak end rule. So basically, if someone's going to play a session of your game, the most intense part and the final part are the two parts that they remember, right? They don't remember the beginning of the match. They don't remember the like dragging on towards the end of the match. They remember that really crazy thing that happened and they remember how it ended. So be conscious of that and design for those parts, right? When something epic is happening, make the screen shake, fucking pop off fireworks, really, really amp up that part because that's what they'll remember, right? Nothing's worse than like when you pulled off the nastiest trick shot in the game and the game just literally doesn't recognize it. And you're like, that was unbelievable. And the game's like, I don't care. And you're like, okay, great. This game doesn't have the same values as me, right? Similarly, serial position effect. Players best remember the first and last item in the series, right? So they won't remember every one of your submachine guns. They'll remember the first one they saw, and they'll remember the one that they were just using. Zeigarnik effect. This is players remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks. So this is why progress bars around your dailies and weeklies are so effective. This is the psychological thing of like, as humans, we want to see bar fill and number go up. So you can use that to your advantage to get people to do the things you want them to do. Here's a Milton Glaser quote. I'm going to skip it because we're almost out of time. Some quick UX power tools. One, whatever the language reading direction of the culture you're making your thing for, that generally determines how players' eyes will scan that screen, right? So if you're doing it in English, generally top left to bottom right is how everyone in that region will instinctually read it, right? So it's totally different in the Middle East. It's different in some parts of Asia. It's worth knowing that like, this is the most important thing. Where do I put it? Don't put it in the bottom right corner, especially if you're appealing to Western audiences, right? If your composition of a screen feels awkward, I like to tell my designers, find what belongs to what, right? So if you're designing an inventory screen, generally the things at the top are the like most important categorical buckets that are they own the other things, right? Position them and size them according like to their ranks, right? And then if you're in doubt about sorting a bunch of stuff in a game, I always tell people to default to nav sections are nouns and actions are verbs, right? So you have things like a lobby, legends, loadouts, clubs, store. Those are nouns. Those are things that are sections of my game. And then the actions that I need to take are like ready up, unlock, equip. Those are all the verbs. So your buttons in general should be verbs. Your big wayfinding things should be nouns. That's just a simple trick to at least make it make sense off the bat. Use smart defaults to reduce cognitive load, right? So just pre-choose all the settings that most players want. Uh, I know everyone's like, oh, I can add a checkbox for this variation. I can add a little drop-down menu to let them pick one of these three things in settings. Yes, but the vast majority of your players won't ever change any of that. So make sure that the one you start with is the really most popular one. This is something from live service. It's easier to expand a feature over time than reduce it, right? So players of a game will generally react poorly if you remove something that they're used to having there. So launch a smaller version and then improve it and add on to it later, rather than spend all your time building this huge thing, launching it, and then saying, oh, it's not as popular as I thought. Let's take it away, right? So on Apex, we did that with arenas. We spent a ton of time building arenas and we launched it, and then suddenly not enough of the player base played it, so we had to turn it off from like a server cost perspective, and then everyone was very, very mad. So we should have launched a baby version of arenas, tested it first, and grown it if it was popular. Yeah, design needs to be plugged into human behavior. Design dissolves in behavior. This is playtest, 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 right? Playtest is where your design will like soak in it, and you'll start to feel the truths about your design. And that is it.